All right, welcome to 24 hours of PASS, growing our community. We are excited you could join us today for Cathrine Wilhelmsen's session. Don't repeat yourself, an introduction to Agile SSIS development. This 24 hours of PASS event consists of 24 consecutive live webcasts delivered by up and coming speakers and experts from the PASS community. All sessions will be available next week on 24hoursofpass.com. My name is Régis Baccaro, and I am a principal consultant at a Danish company called Refeld. I work with all things BI and do a lot of teaching and mentoring. And I have a few quick introduction slides before I hand over the reins to Cathrine. She will speak for 40 to 45 minutes, and then we'll move on to the Q&A, where you can ask any questions you may have. If you're having any issues, just type your question into the question pane on the GoToWebinar control panel, and someone will assist you. To maximize your screen, use the Zoom button located on the top of the presentation windows, and feel free to enter your question in the Q&A field at any time. The questions pane located on the right side of your screen. Once we get to the Q&A portion of the session, I'll read off your questions for the speaker. Since all attendees are muted, you will need to submit questions by typing in the Q&A field. Note that there will be a short evaluation at the end of the session, and your feedback is important to us, so please take a moment to complete it. It will show up on your screen. I'd like to take a moment to thank our presenting sponsors, Microsoft, Cisco, and Dell Software. In addition, I'd also like to thank the support sponsors for this event, Sentry, HP, and SolarWinds. The staging of 24 hours of PASS would not be possible without their support and dedication. And they are the reason this event is available free of charge. Next, I'd like to bring your attention to the upcoming PASS Summit. Taking place in Seattle, Washington from October 27th to the 30th, PASS Summit 2015 will feature over 200 sessions with world-class SQL Server experts, planned and presented by the SQL Server community for the SQL Server community. PASS Summit is single-handedly the largest gathering of SQL Server and BI professionals. With over 5,000 attendees from all over the world, PASS Summit is also a great place to network and meet face-to-face with experts, peers, and MVPs. More importantly, PASS Summit delivers on providing you with the answers to your SQL Server issues, along with the knowledge, strategies, and skills you need to stay ahead of the curve. Contact your local chapter for a discount card to save $100. And optimize your savings by registering before the end of Sunday, July the 12th. To find out more about PASS Summit, visit www.passsummit.com. And now, please allow me to present the speaker of the hour, Cathrine Wilhelmsen. Cathrine is a data warehouse architect and developer for a Norwegian financial company called Storebrand, and she's very active in the Biml and SQL Server community, organizing the SQL Saturday in Oslo, a PASS outstanding volunteers, and she's a board member of the SQL Server user group. Cathrine, here you go.
Thank you so much. Before we start, I would just like to say thank you to PASS and to our sponsors as well for giving me and other speakers the opportunity to share our knowledge with the SQL Server community. Like Régis said, this wouldn't be possible without our sponsors, so thank you. And thank you to everyone who's attending my session here today. The session is called Don't Repeat Yourself, and it is an introduction to Agile SSIS development using Biml and BimlScript. Before we start, this is quite a short session, and I will not go into a lot of details. There are quite a few great tutorials and walkthroughs and videos out there on the basics of Biml that you can watch if this is not enough for you. I'll provide a link at the end of the session so you can look at some of the videos there. So first of all, this is all about you and how you can improve your workday. And this is where I usually like to ask people some questions and get them to raise their hand and see who they are and what their experience is, but I can't do that since you're all inside my computer at the moment. So I made a couple of assumptions. The first one is that you're an SSIS and ETL developer. You already know the SSIS tools, and maybe you're like me, maybe you get easily bored and you're tired of repetitive work, which is why you're looking into Agile SSIS development. And the reason for this is probably that you're spending a lot of time developing SSIS packages, and you might be developing and maintaining a lot of SSIS packages. And you've probably also experienced that the GUI editor can be quite slow at times. It's a great feature for those who are starting to learn SSIS. It's very intuitive, but as soon as you get into more advanced development, it kind of slows you down a bit. And opening up all the message boxes and things like that, it just takes a bit of time. And if this sounds familiar, then you're probably a bit like me where you've experienced this scenario where you finish a project and you're super excited because the job's done, you've delivered all your packages and feeling really great, and then someone from management or maybe an architect comes along and they go like, yeah, but we have a couple of new standards that we need you to implement, and maybe your reaction is something like this where you go like, yay, I get to go through all my 200 packages one more time to implement that change. And if this sounds familiar to you, then you're probably ready for a change. And what kind of change is it that we're ready for? The first one is the technical thing, where you now have things like Biml and BimlScript that allows you to develop SSIS packages in a completely different way than we've been used to. But it's also kind of the mindset where you need to change the way you're thinking about SSIS development. You need to go from creating a package to thinking more in logical terms. So what we want to do is we want to move away from the more traditional SSIS development, what we call plumbing, and move towards the more agile SSIS development, where we can focus on the business logic and delivering value to business users as quickly as possible. And what I mean with this plumbing part is basically everything in an SSIS package that is not related to delivering business value. So there are kind of two parts to this. The first one is what you actually do to develop SSIS packages today, which is a lot of dragging, a lot of dropping. You need to connect the arrows, open up boxes, click OK, all of that. And if you're slightly OCD like me, you probably spend a lot of time resizing and aligning things as well to make packages look okay. And the other one is all the tasks that you implement in your SSIS packages that are not actually business logic. Things like logging, error handling, row counts, and even how you implement SCD changes, for example. Things like that are basically just the plumbing and the framework. It's not the business value. And very often you end up creating the same package over and over and over again with just a few changes on which source tables you're pulling out and a couple of transformations that you might change and then loading it into a different table. But mainly it's that same package. And you can get away with quite a lot of this by creating patterns and templates upfront, defining standards, but this doesn't really help you when you need to change your packages after that initial development time. If you need to change something, you will have to go through every single package one more time. And this can often lead to a high risk of manual errors. If you need to go through 200 packages or 1,000 or even more, then you might just forget one of those packages. Or if you're doing 10 steps in each package, you forget one of those steps, and it might not be easy to actually see when you've missed something when you're working with that amount of packages. And also, with the traditional SSIS, the more packages you have, the more time it takes to develop the packages and to update those packages. And that's kind of what we want to move away from and over to the agile SSIS development, where you want to focus on the business logic, what's unique in a package. And this is what you can do with Biml. You can create patterns. You can create the patterns once and then reuse that for all of those packages that follow that pattern. And this allows you to quickly change packages. You can respond to requirement changes, and you can apply those changes to all your packages at the same time. And this, of course, lowers the risk of manual errors. One drawback is that it might take a bit longer to start because you need to learn a new language. You need to rethink the way you're developing. But as soon as you've gotten through that first part, then you can start reusing projects. You can scale up and out and deliver core value first and then just expand as you learn. And this is a whole new way of developing SSIS packages. Now, this is where Biml comes in. And before I go into the actual Biml language, will Biml solve all my problems? Probably not. Biml is a tool like a lot of other things, and you need to know when to use Biml and when Biml is probably not the right tool to use. So Biml is a tool for generating SSIS packages. It is not a predefined data warehouse framework, and it is not a tool for automated deployment. But it will solve many problems. And there are other things that Biml is and is not, but these are just core things I wanted to focus on here. And how Biml can help you in terms of SSIS development is it is quite time-saving. You can create one Biml file and then generate a whole lot of SSIS packages from that one file. It's reusable, so you can use that one Biml file, that one BimlScript, and then run it on a 2005 platform to generate 2005 packages. And you can run that same script on 2014 and get 2014 packages. So this is where you can kind of build your Biml toolbox and bring it with you on different platforms and then reuse it as you go along. And also, like I mentioned earlier, it's flexible as well. You can start simple. You can start with the basic Biml to solve a couple of easy things, and then as you learn, you can expand it. You can add more metadata handling. You can add more logic and things like that. But just start simple and then keep going. So I've mentioned Biml a couple of times now. What is Biml? Biml stands for Business Intelligence Markup Language. And it is actually a lot more than just for business intelligence, but Biml is kind of a fun word to say, so they stuck with that. It is an easy to read and write XML dialect that describes business intelligence objects. Things like your relational model with databases, schemas, tables, and columns. Also SSIS packages, which is what we're going to focus on in this session. And you can also use it to create SSIS cubes, facts, dimensions. That is not available in the free version that I'm going to use today, but it is an option, as well as a couple of other things that you can use Biml for when you start to actually learn the language a bit more. So to use Biml, you basically have what you need already. You need Visual Studio, BIDS, SSD TBI, and you need the free add-on BIDS helper. Hopefully, all of you who are here have already installed BIDS helper and is using it. If you're not using it right now, please go and install it. And I'm just going to show you quickly here on bidshelper.codeplex.com is where you can find the download link. BIDS helper has a lot of other features and not just for Biml. You can see just a couple of things highlighted in the screenshot right here. Go download it. It's a great tool and it is free. And that's basically all you need for your Biml development. So how does this actually work? Well, the first thing you do is you add some Biml files to your SSIS project. You can add Biml and or BimlScript to the files. And then by using the Biml compiler, which is built into the BIDS helper add-on in Visual Studio, that will actually read your Biml, translate it, and then generate the SSIS packages for you. And these packages are indistinguishable from manually created packages. You can't tell the difference if you created it manually or via Biml. And everything you can do in Biml, in SSIS, you can also do in Biml. So there's not like you're missing out on features because you're using Biml instead. So you can do project deployment, package deployment, you can add parameters, all kinds of different connections, change data capture has been included, you can connect to APS and PDW. Anything you can do in SSIS, you can also do in Biml. Biml is just the tool and the language that you can use to generate these packages instead of doing it by hand. And just to go through the basic syntax here, this is a very simple example of two empty packages that are quite useless, but it's just to show you the syntax and how this works. And you can see it's quite easy already to read this. The first part is the Biml, where you say that this is a Biml file, what we call the root element. Inside the root element, you can have different collection of elements. So you can have a packages collection, you can have a connections collection, tables collection, all of these things. And inside these collections, you have different elements. In this example, we have two packages, empty package 1 and empty package 2. And these elements have attributes that define different properties. Some things are specified as attributes, other as child elements. So if you want to add child elements, you will need to use the first syntax highlighted here, where you have the slash and tag at the end. That allows you to place child elements inside that tag. If you don't have any child elements, if you just want to use the attribute, create a simple task, you can use the shorthand syntax where you place a slash at the end instead. It's just a couple of basics in XML and Biml there for you. And the way you add Biml files is you go into your SSIS project. You right-click and then you say Add Biml File. That Biml file will be placed in the miscellaneous folder. The default name is BimlScript.biml. You can rename that and do whatever you want, add your Biml, and when you have something that you're ready to generate packages, you just right-click on that file and click on Generate SSIS Packages. And that will interpret that Biml for you through the Biml compiler and create these packages in your project. So I'm just going to show you really quickly now how this works before I move on. So in here, I have my, let me see if I can zoom in, my Introduction to Biml project. And if I right-click here, I can add new Biml file. I'm not going to do that right now. I'm just going to go to this empty package, right-click, click on Generate SSIS Packages, and you will see right away that this shows up in our SSIS packages as an empty package.dtsx. So that's just a really basic of how this works. I'm just going to delete this one now because we won't need that. And just to show you a bit more advanced than just the empty package and how Biml actually translates to SSIS. In this example, you will see the Biml on the left side. So in this case, you have the load person package. It contains an execute SQL task and a data flow. And just from this basic Biml here, you can kind of picture what the SSIS package will look like. And then if you go into this data flow, again, you can kind of see step by step what's going on with the first one up here, the source. Then you add a load date derived column, you add a row count, and then the destination at the end. And that directly translates to this SSIS package right here. So while this is a bit more code than just the basic, all of you should be able to read and understand what's going on in this SSIS package without even really thinking about it. And that's the great part about Biml. It's human readable and human writable. And this is where I like to ask people how many actually have opened up a DTSX package and looked at the code, and ask them if it's easy to read and write. And the most people, they just shake their head and go, nope, it's not. And here's an example of that, where you have the Biml code on the left side and then the DTSX code on the right side. And on the left side, I've used 150% zoom, and you can still see all the Biml code. On the right side, you have a 20% zoom, and you still can't see all of the DTSX code. So imagining trying to write all of that XML by hand, it's basically impossible. And that's where Biml comes in to kind of bridge that gap between the SSIS development and being able to script and automate a lot of that development. So the real power is when you start adding BimlScript to your project. Pure Biml is just XML, and it's quite verbose. If you want to write XML Biml for 5 packages, you would have to repeat that 5 times, and that's not what we want to do. So that's when we start adding BimlScript, which is C# or VB.NET code blocks that allows you to control and manipulate the Biml code. So you can pick out parts of your Biml code that you want to repeat. You can import database structure and metadata. You can loop over tables and columns, add expressions to replace static values with things like table names and column names. And all of this is where you get really powerful parts of Biml. And you have 4 different kinds of code blocks in BimlScript. The first one is the directive, which is basically instructions to the Biml compiler on how to interpret the Biml files that it's translating into SSIS packages. The second one is control blocks, where you have all the basic control logic. You can use loops, you can use if-else statements, things like that. Anything you can do in C# you can do in these control blocks. Then you have expression control blocks, where it evaluates what's inside that control block, returns it as a string, and that control block is replaced with the string value in your Biml code. So that's what you use if you want to get the table name and use that somewhere. And the last one is the class feature control block, where you can create helper methods. I'm not going to go into that in this session since that's a bit more advanced, but just imagine if you need to write quite a lot of advanced code and reuse that, it's better to create a helper method than having to repeat that code over and over again. So for the syntax, this is the biggest part of BimlScript is learning the C#, but with just a couple of basic things, you can get really far by using Biml and BimlScript. So in this example here, we've just added a for each loop outside our packages. So in this case, for each table, we want to create a package, and that package we want to call load and then the name of the table. So for each table, create a loading package with the name of the table. And just by knowing this basic BimlScript and nothing else of C#, you can do an incredibly powerful project in just a few hours, really. So again, how does it work? You write the Biml, you add your BimlScript, run it through the Biml compiler, and then it generates the DTSX SSIS packages for you. But when you add BimlScript, you kind of add a second layer to that, where you look at the BimlScript first, then you translate that into flat Biml, which is just the XML, and that is parsed into the packages. So if you have a for each loop, maybe you just have 3 lines of code in your BimlScript file right now, but that is actually expanded into 500 lines of code in pure Biml. But you don't have to write those 500 lines yourself, which is great. And an example of that is in this screenshot here, where we have the loop running through the Biml compiler, creates the Biml for each package, and then that is translated into the packages. And this is kind of where we get to the core point of using Biml and BimlScript, where you don't want to repeat yourself. That's the whole point of using Biml and BimlScript in the first place. You don't want to repeat yourself by creating the same SSIS package over and over and over again. And you don't want to repeat yourself by writing the same code over and over and over again. So in our case here, by using Biml and BimlScript, there are 3 main parts that you can avoid repeating yourself. And this allows you to move common code to separate files. You can then centralize and reuse these files in many projects, and then that allows you to update that code just once for all your projects. So you can just maintain it in one place instead of going through lots of different files, instead of going through all the SSIS packages. And the 3 things we're going to look at today, the first one is where you split and combine Biml files. The second one is where you include files. And the third one is where you use call BimlScript with parameters. I will go through each of this. So the first one, split and combine files. This allows you to add dependencies between your Biml files and also to simulate manual workflows by using what we call tiers. When you specify tiers, then the Biml compiler understands that it needs to do the lowest tiers first, compile that, then move on to the next tier, and so on from the lowest to the highest. And Biml files with higher tiers can use and might also depend on objects from lower tiers. And this is just a way for you to kind of simulate those manual workflows, split files so you can reuse them across projects and things like that. And a common example of how you split and combine Biml files is where you first add your database connections. You create the database connections that you can reuse across all your different Biml files. So if you're doing traditional staging and then dimension and fact loading, you might want to use the same database connection across all of those. And the second part is creating the actual loading packages where you move data from A to B. And finally, you might want to create a master package to execute all those different loading packages. And in a normal workflow, what you would do is you would first create the database connection in the package, create the loading parts, deploy the packages, and then create the master package at the end. But you can specify by using tiers. You can tell the compiler to do it in this way, but you actually just do it in one step. And I'll just go back to my project here. And I know I'm skipping over a few of these things right now, so hopefully you will be able to follow along. If you don't, contact me after the session, and I will be happy to explain more for you. So in our case here, we have one file that is the actual environment file, where we specify our connections. So in this case, we have our source connection and our destination connection. And I've also added what we call an annotation to our destination connection, where I just want to specify which schema I want to load data into. This is more technical, but you can add annotations and reuse that across Biml files as well. So this is really simple. The tier 1, this is what we want to do first. We want to establish our connection to our database. And then in our tier 2 file, now we're getting to more of the actual logic of loading packages. So in our case, here we have a directive that says import namespace. And if you're familiar with C#, this is basically like a using statement. We just want to use something called the schema manager, so we have to tell the compiler, go and grab that code for us. Then we have our source database, and this is where we use our connection called source that we previously created in the tier 1 file. So this is where we're depending on something from another Biml file. And what we're saying here, we just want to import all the metadata from the production schema in AdventureWorks. I'm just limiting this to one schema so I don't get all the packages here right now. And then I add the destination schema, where I actually go to the destination annotation and get the tag name schema, so I know which schema to load the data into. Just a couple of basic things here. Now, hopefully it's easy to follow along, even though this is code. And then we go into our packages collection. And then for each of the tables in our source database, which is AdventureWorks in our case, we create a package called load, and then we use the schema name and then the table name. We add a variable for our new rows count, which is the data type in 32. Then we add our execute SQL task, which basically just truncates the staging table. And in this case, again, we're picking out the table schema name and the table name and using that to create the SSIS task name. And then we specify that this is our destination that we want to truncate. And again, here we use a destination schema, table schema, and table name. This might be different for you if you have different naming standards and things like that, but it's all customizable. Then we go into our actual data flow, which is what I showed you earlier, where we have source, we have a derived column, row count, and the OLEDB destination. Really simple staging package. And then at the end here, we just close the loop. Everything that happens inside this for each loop is being created for each table we have. And then finally, we want to create our master packages, which is our template tier 3. And this is where we go back to the whole kind of simulate our workflow, where we now use not the tables, but the packages that we already created in the previous step. And for each of those packages, we just want to say execute package. Now I'm using package deployment here just because it's simple for this example. You could also do project deployment or whatever else you need to do, basically. And now we've split our Biml code into 3 separate files. So in our case, what we do in this second file is just a basic staging loading pattern. We could also do the whole loading of dimensions, of fact tables, things like that in this, and then still reuse this environment file with our connections and the master package file, because that kind of just tells you where to get the data from and to, and to create a master package of all the packages we created in the middle tier. So how this works is we just go to our project and select all of these 3 files at the same time. That specifies to the Biml compiler that we want to run all of these files and compile the code. based on the tiers we specified. So when we right-click and click on Generate SSIS Packages, it's just going to take a bit of time because it goes to my database, pulls out the metadata, and creates all the packages for us that we now have in our project. And we also have down here our master package that you can see. So if we open up our master package, you will now see that this has all of the execute packages of the other loading packages. So this is that part where you can split and combine files and say that instead of doing the staging pattern I would do for a second Biml file where I have my dimension loading pattern, I could click on the environment, the master package, and then that new file, and then reuse things instead of copying and pasting and having several places to manage my database connection and my master package generation. So that's the first part of not repeating yourself. And I can actually see here in the chat right now where we have a question if you can generate BimlScript from an existing DTS package. It is currently not available to do that in Bits Helper. You can do that if you download Mist and the free trial of that. And I know that there are plans to make this import package reverse engineering feature available for free in the future, but you just have to keep watching. Currently, it's not possible to do that in the free version, so you would have to write the Biml code yourself. So I'm just going to close all of these and go back to my slide for a bit. So this is just what I showed you in the demo right now, where you create the different Biml files, select them, right-click, and generate. So what you have to do is just click on 3 different files and click Generate. And behind the scenes in the Biml compiler, it does all of these steps for you. Now the second part of don't repeating yourself is where you can include files. And if you're familiar with any kind of programming language, this is a very basic feature where you grab a file that's located somewhere else and then you kind of place it into your main file. And in our case, you use the include directive, include file, and specify the name of the file. It can be any kind of file. It can be a Biml file, a text file. You can use a C# file, whatever you need. And what happens is that you basically just pull that file, copy the content of that file, and place it into your main file. Super easy, but instead of you doing the whole copying and pasting of code yourself, and having to maintain that piece of code in multiple Biml files, you just kind of split that into a separate file, and then you can maintain it in that one include file. So this is where you can have the include file appear in the middle, and that will just be pasted into your main Biml file over here. Very simple. And I can go back to my project and show you an example of that as well. Let me just clean up quickly here because we don't need these packages. So in our case, I'm sure you can think of 100 different use cases for including common components in your SSIS package. One example that I have is, for example, for logging, where again we have our same loading package. So I'm not going to go through all of this code again. But if we want to add logging to that package in Biml, that code is quite verbose, especially if you have a lot of events that you want to log. So all of this is maybe 150 lines of code. And you absolutely do not want to repeat that code in multiple Biml files and maintain it, and then you would have to go through several different Biml files if you want to change some of these log events. So what you can do, instead of having all of this code in line in your Biml file, is that you can split it into a separate file where you just keep the logging parts that you want to use, the same code just split into a separate file, and then in your Biml file, instead of having all of that code, you just specify include file logging or whatever else. And hopefully you're all kind of thinking of different use cases for where you can have different execute SQL tasks or whatever you need to do that you can just maintain in one location and include it where you need it, instead of having to copy and paste between SSIS packages, changing things, all of that. So hopefully I'm just getting you to think about your own projects here by showing a couple of examples. And if I just do the inline logging first, show you, generate SSIS package, we will have our package here. And I know already that I will get an error when I open this logging because there is a bug in Visual Studio 2013 with SQL Server 2014 development. So please just ignore this error right here. That is a bug they're currently working on. But as we can see, we have our logging and our details in here, different events that we want to log. So that is by using the code inline, which is this one here. Now, by using our included file, we will get the exactly same results. We're generating a new SSIS package where the file has been included. And again, please just ignore the nice error that we get here. And here you can see we have our events. And now, if you want to do this for lots of different packages, all you have to do is change the actual included logging. So if we want to, for example, when we go into production, we don't want these diagnostic events, you can just remove them from this file, save it, then regenerate the package. Now this will just ask me, do you want to overwrite the package that we already created? I want to do that, and I want to reload the package that is already opened. And now when we go into our logging, we will see, when we close the error, that we no longer have these diagnostic events. So that's kind of where you can start splitting out code, including in where needed, and then just regenerate all the packages that uses that include file. So let me just close all these, go back to my slide deck. And the final one is where you use something called call BimlScript. This works kind of like a stored procedure from SQL Server that you're probably already familiar with, where you pass parameters to a file. We pass the parameters to a file instead of the actual stored procedure, but it works in the same way. And in this case, you will need two different files. The first one, the file that we actually call, the callee, you can think of that as the stored procedure we have in SQL Server. This is where you need to specify which parameters that file accepts. So in that case, you use the property directive. You give the parameter a name, for example, table, and a type. In my case, I'm using a very Biml-specific file type, data type here called AST table node. That is just a table that we get from our metadata. You can use everything here. You can do basic types like strings, ints, and booleans. You can use Biml-specific things like you can pass in tables and even packages, and more regular C# things like lists and arrays of things that you can use. So any data type you can pass through this. And then again, I'm hoping to kind of inspire you to think, how can you use this in your own SSIS projects? And then the caller will just pass those parameters to the callee. So that's where you say call BimlScript, the name of the file you want to call, and then you pass the different kinds of parameters. And what this does is the call BimlScript code pushes those parameters from the caller to the callee. Then that callee file will use those parameters to do some logic, evaluate the code, and then return the Biml. So while the include just kind of pulls the code and copies and pastes, this call BimlScript allows you to do logic and do different things before you return the code that is then kind of copied and replaced into the main Biml file. So let me show you an example of that as well. So in my project, I have one file called the callee. And this is where in the free tool, you get this lovely notepad view when you're using BimlScript. The Visual Studio with the Bits Helper add-on doesn't really understand when you're using BimlScript in your code. It understands pure Biml because that is just XML, but when you add BimlScript, it can get confused sometimes, like in this case. And sometimes if you have a lot of code, this can be a bit tricky. It can be a bit difficult to actually read this code. So what you can do here, there are a couple of tips and tricks you can do inside Visual Studio to get this to work, but the easiest thing is to go to bimlscript.com, a great website with lots of resources, blog posts, tutorials, things like that. But it also has this nice little thing called Develop. So when you go into Develop, you have an editor where you can paste your code and it will actually format the code for you. And now you can see it's a whole lot easier to see where you have your BimlScript nuggets, where you have just a pure Biml, and it's just kind of easier to see. You don't get any IntelliSense, but as kind of a workaround of Visual Studio not understanding BimlScript, this is a great tool. And you can also right-click here and choose Install onto this computer, which allows you to use this offline as well. Just a nice little trick there. So just to go through this, where we actually have the color formatting and things like that, in our callee, we specify our different properties, which are our parameters. So in my case, it accepts a table, which is of type AST table node. Again, that's a Biml specific data type. I want to pass in my source connection and my destination connection. This allows me to make this more dynamic because I can pass in different sources and different destinations without having to copy all of that code multiple times. I also pass in the destination schema so I know where in my staging database I want to save the data. And just to show you how this logic thing works when you pass in parameters, I've added a flag called include load date. And this is really simple. You probably are getting sick of looking at my staging package by now. It's the same code. But what I've done down here is I've added this little code nugget that says if include load date, and I could also say equals true just to be specific, but this is the shorthand syntax. If that is true, then add this derived column. If it is not true, then it's just not going to do anything inside this control block. So that's what's in this file here. Then we can open up the caller file, which we can recognize from one of our earlier packages, where we have our import namespace, we have our connections, we use our import DB method to actually import our metadata, we specify our connections, and again, I could have done this even more flexible in Agile by splitting out these connections to a separate file, but just to keep it easy for this example, I just have it in this caller file. And then inside my packages collection, I do my for each loop on all the tables from AdventureWorks. And for each table, I call BimlScript. So I call the actual file, which is called 501 callee.biml. I pass in the table that we're currently looping over, as well as the different kinds of connections that we're using. And then finally, the flag for if we want to include the load date or not. In this case, I'm just using false. So what this does, when I right-click and click on Generate SSIS Packages, it's going to go in, call BimlScript, do the logic in that package, return the Biml code to me, replace it into the file, and do that for all the different packages. And as we can see, in my project here, we now have all our different loading packages. So if I open up one of these, we will now see inside the data flow that we only have 3 tasks. We have our source, our count, and our destination. And let's just open up one more just to make sure that all of these packages look exactly the same. We have our source, count, and destination. Now, if I change that flag in my call BimlScript code to say that, for production environments or test environments or something else, I actually want to include that load date or other kind of columns you want to change, you can just change this flag, save this file, rerun and regenerate these packages. Now again, it's going to grab all the metadata, do the call BimlScript, and that just takes some time for it to process. Then I will get a notification that's asking me if I want to actually overwrite all of these packages that I created, which I will. And now it's asking me if I want to reload the open files I have, which again, I will. And now if we look at our files, we will now see that our load date is included. Also in our other package, our load date is included. And this is where you can kind of start to see the real power of using Biml and BimlScript. Imagine that you had 200 of these loading packages and you wanted to start adding a new derived column in each of these packages. You would have to go in, delete, drag and drop, change the connection, add the arrows again, reconnect, maybe realign, all of that. It is so easy in Biml where you just change one flag. And just start thinking about your own projects, how you can do this in a more dynamic way. So hopefully, I know that I went through this quite fast. Like I said earlier, feel free to contact me if there's anything you want me to explain in more detail than I can do in just 45 minutes in this session. But to sum this up, we did the demos. Just to sum this up, what you do to start learning this. First of all, download Bits Helper. Identify your different SSIS patterns. The easiest one to start with is the staging pattern, where you just load from a source to a destination. There are some great videos out there, especially by Scott Curry, who is the creator of Biml. I will show you a link in just a minute. And then start rewriting one of your SSIS packages to Biml, and just pure Biml. And again, it is currently not possible to reverse engineer SSIS packages to Biml by using Bits Helper, but there are some plans, so just keep watching the news for that. Then when you kind of got the hang of Biml and how that works, start expanding with BimlScript. Finally, separate and reuse that common Biml code so you can start adding it to several files, several projects, and that will get you started on building your entire framework. And I promise you, when you get to that point, you will never look back to the days of drag and drop again. And finally, here's kind of a bit of a plea from me. Please get involved in the community if you start using Biml and if you think this is a great tool. It is quite a new technology, and we would love to learn more how you use Biml, especially if you find those use cases that are a bit untraditional. And then when you start using Biml, that's when you can start doing all of this development and finish your job before lunch on Monday, and then take the rest of the week off. So you can go on vacation, or you can start presenting webinars like I'm doing here. So Biml on Monday, Biml break the rest of the week. Just don't tell your boss about that. So that's it for me. Like I said, go to cathrinewilhelmsen.net/Biml. That's where I've collected all my resources. I have lots of videos, I have links to blog posts, things like that. And again, contact me if there's anything I can help you with. You can use contact@cathrinewilhelmsen.net. You can find me on Twitter, find me through the contact form on my website, or even connect with me on LinkedIn. Just add a note saying that you're interested in learning Biml or something. So that's it for me. Let's see if we have any questions.
Yes, actually, Cathrine, thank you again. I got a question here from Askia, who is asking if it is possible to update packages with Biml instead of recreating them, if there has been some manual work done on them.
Not in the free tool. Again, if you use Mist, Mist is an integrated development environment especially created for Biml and Biml projects. That is a licensed tool. You will have to pay for it, but that allows you to both import packages and reverse engineer them, and also use the fourth method of not repeating yourself, where you can actually apply changes to existing packages. That's the most powerful feature, but since it's not available in the free tool, I have not actually talked about that here. But yes, check out Mist, check out something called Transformers. That will allow you to change existing packages, both ad hoc and automated.
All right, thank you. And a question from Adedamola, who is asking if we can get access to these demo scripts of yours.
Absolutely. I will, as soon as I finish my session here, I will upload my slides. Slides are available on the 24 Hours of PASS website. I will also send them all my scripts so they can package that and make it available. I will also make it available on my blog, so you will find it all over.
And Daniel is asking if when you use include files, do you always need to add the file to the solution?
No. You can use relative paths or the full path. So you can have just on your C drive or another drive, you can have your entire code project there with your include files and just pull them. So you can add them to your project or have them outside your project.
All right, thank you. And I don't see any more questions here that were not answered. So thank you for attending. Don't repeat yourself. An introduction to Agile SSIS development. And I'd like to thank Cathrine for her time and her expertise. Again, I'd like to also thank our presenting sponsors, Microsoft, Cisco, and Dell Software, and the supporting sponsors, Sentry, HP, and SolarWinds. So we hope you enjoyed the session as much as we did. And follow along on the social medias with the @PASS24HOP and share your thoughts on the event with the hashtags #PASS24HOP and SQLPass.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for attending, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
And stay tuned for our next session, the data loading performance presentation with Mata and Youngman happening in a few minutes. Thank you, Cathrine.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.